Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today the long-awaited Characters Tier List series will finally get underway on the channel, as we'll kick things off this week with a tier list ranking for all the unique Vanguard generals in the game Total War 3 Kingdoms. Now for those of you with a keen eye, you might notice that a few Vanguards are missing from our tier list here, and there's a pretty good reason for that, as Empress He, Sima Yong, and Sima Wei are all excluded because they will belong in other tier lists that's coming in the future. Now, the reason for this is quite simple, as it is quite pointless to compare characters that cannot coexist with each other due to time differences or to the fact that they're designed to be non-deployable. Therefore, in the coming weeks, there will be a separate 8 princes tier list comparing all the princes, and a tier list for all the non-deployable characters currently in the game. But first, we'll cover the basics and go from class to class every Saturday, as we'll kick things off today with the Vanguard class. And like most of my other tier lists on the channel, I will start with an overview for all these characters, as we'll look at their background bonuses, starting traits, items, and skills in order to highlight some of their strengths and weaknesses before coming back here to rank all of them. So in alphabetic order, we're going to kick things off by taking a deeper look at Zhuo. Now, the first thing we're going to look at when we look at a character is their background bonus and their stat boost from their background bonus, and this is sort of the background title that the game has given them. So here, Zhuo is known as the Cruel Tyrant. It's giving him 3 types of stat boosts, 10 points in Cunning, 20 points in Instinct, and 30 points in Authority, and a lot of other bonuses that can be granted to faction-wide or personal or army. And in his case, he gets 50% post-battle loot income, which is actually quite good, and 50% income from family estate if he's the leader. So that's worth an extra 1,000 per turn, since the default family estate for every faction in the game is 2,000. And he also gets 15% recruitment cost discount for shock cavalry if he is leader, prime minister, or heir, and also 15% melee damage for all shock cavalry units. So that's kind of the same thing for his leadership position. It's a heavy focus on red shock cavalry. That's kind of playing into his special faction unit. And this is all designed for him to be a faction leader. That's why we have 30 points of authority. And to keep things fair in this tier list, we're going to consider all these generals sort of ageless and factionless, because if we are not playing as Zhuo, there's almost zero chance for you to capture him as a general in your army. So we're going to have to consider that as a way to balance things out, because availability is not really one of these factors that we'll focus on. And also age is also kind of unfair in that timeless mode is available as well. So we're going to ignore the fact that he starts out 52 in the 190 start, which is actually quite old because you start getting the death counter once you're 60. So overall, a pretty strong list of bonuses. 60 stat point boost is very in line with a unique general. Some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. And the ones that are lower, I'm going to complain quite a bit because most of those characters were generic characters that got art later on, and CA probably forgot to update their stats to reflect the fact that they now have unique art. So this is Zhuo's background bonus. And then we can take a look at his starting trait. Now, most characters starts out with 3 traits. There's actually a couple that starts out with more, which is actually quite interesting. But here, Zhuo has the standard 3. Cruel gives him a little bit extra instinct, authority, loses some public order if he's a leader, which he usually is. +5 military supplies for his armies, 10% peasantry income to make up for the public order loss. He's also greedy, losing him some resolve, so small loss of health, +6 authority, 50% desire for higher office. Doesn't matter if you're a leader, but if you get him in another faction, it does matter a little bit. If he's administrator, increased corruption, also increased desire to gain independence as administrator. Lastly, he has arrogant, which increases or decreases his chance of running away from capture post-battle. So helps you capture him more often, but because he's leader, he'll never join you. You can release or execute him. Now, why would you execute him? Well, he starts out the game with some special items. You always have your armor, and it's a really good one on Zhuo with 80 base armor, which is the highest value in the game right now. 15 instinct, 6 points of authority, kind of reflecting on his leader role again, 5% melee attack rate. Blade of Xiahou Yuan is usually why you would execute him, because you get 1.7k melee base, 429 melee armor piercing. So this is all based on large unit size. These numbers will scale up and down depending on unit size. 30 melee attack rate, which is the highest you will find on any weapon. Now, most of the damage is on base, so usually that's not good. But the blade itself comes with a debuff on the enemy, where it will hurt the enemy armor by 25%, thus increasing your overall damage output, despite the fact your blade tend to be heavier on the base damage. Extra authority for leadership gives you scare, gives you extra charge bonus where you're on horse charging into the enemy unit, which is usually the job for most Vanguard generals. So overall, very strong items for Zhuo. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at skills. Now, most Vanguards have 3 default skills: Flame of the Phoenix, Roar of the Beast, and Final Rush. But some unique characters, or actually most unique characters, will tend to have a few unique skills that will replace these standard generic skills. So here for Zhuo, he has 2 unique ones called Reign of Terror and Blade Breaker. And then he kept Flames of the Phoenix, which is the smash ability, 360 zone, 3.8k splash damage. Very, very useful, very, very strong. He lost the movement boost for when under half health, which is Final Rush. He also lost Roar of the Beast, which is minus 18 morale. Now that is actually super strong right now, so that is actually quite a big loss. But let's see what he gained. So for Reign of Terror is an active buff that is 50 meters effective range, so it boosts everyone within 50 meters of himself, allies. 30-second duration of this boost and 120-second cooldown, so it's actually pretty long cooldown. Duration's alright, 30 seconds pretty long, and you get 100% increase to all your melee damage. You lose 50% of melee evasion and you become unbreakable. So it's kind of telling your troops to fight recklessly, including yourself. You can use this, well, you're always going to be the center of this effective range, so you're going to double your damage but lose 50% melee evasion. Now that's not very good, but it's still okay, because if you combine this with the effect from Blade Breaker, there's actually a very interesting strategy you can use with Zhuo against certain types of enemies. So Blade Breaker is a passive buff. It activates once your health goes below 50%, and it lasts forever after that, because very rarely would you heal. Now, if you can heal back up, then this will be disabled until you drop below 50 again, and maybe you have a mending officer in your army that can help boost you back up. But overall, once you activate this, you'll gain 100% of additional armor. That puts your armor above 100% for sure, because you have one of the best armor in the game to begin with. And what happens when you have 100+ percentage of armor is that any sort of base damage is going to glance off and deal nothing. Armor piercing damage will still come through clean. But this is where things get a little bit interesting. So imagine if you're fighting against yellow turban armies that uses Huang Lao Paragons or the peasant, which only have melee damage base. So technically, if you put Zhuo in a mob against thousands and thousands of peasant mobs, and they whack you to the point where you drop below 50, then they will do no more damage to you. And technically, you could end up slaughtering everyone without losing any more health beyond that point, which is actually quite interesting. It's something that I'm actually going to test out and maybe make a little clip of, because I think that's pretty cool in that you can just stand there and tank everything once you drop below 50% health. So if you want to kill Zhuo, if he is on the enemy team, on the AI side, you must make note whether he has this buff or not, and then you have to send the troops that actually have armor piercing damage to go fight him, or else you're going to do very, very little against him. And the last skill we already mentioned is the default skill, Flames of Phoenix. Always useful, deals massive damage around you. And that's pretty much Zhuo as a character. And these are the things that will define him, and we're going to use these to kind of rank him once we get a good overview of everyone. And going along in alphabetic order, our next character is Gan Ning, Pirate of the Bells. And you see here, he only gets 30 points of extra stat. 15 expertise, 10 instinct, 5 resolve. This is really low for a character with unique art. And I think it will be helpful if CA boost this up to close to 60 points, like most characters with unique art. And this is just something very common for characters who got their artwork late. Now his faction-wide bonus here from the background is 15 points of extra charge bonus for shock cavalry. Really, really bad. This is something that I would never consider putting him as a prime minister, heir, or faction leader. It's just not worth it as a bonus, because this is not a 15% boost, this is straight up 15 point boost. So your shock cavalry that has perhaps 240 charge will now have 255 charge. Not a big boost in terms of stat, just really not worth it. Now, what defines him as a good character is perhaps his traits. You have Fiery, which increases charge speed, Competitive, which increases charge bonus, so it's all about charging, and Energetic gives him 5% campaign movement range. Now this design's really because he historically had a great charge with a few cavalry units raiding enemy camps, so this is kind of building up to that. And we can see that in his items a little bit. Not really, we'll talk about where we'll see it in the skills, but his armor is actually quite low at 45, and or 47, a little bit higher than 45. And then 6 points of cunning, 15 points of instinct. The reason why he gets a little bit cunning is that he has the Hail of Arrow skill, so there is a design choice to make him go a little bit towards range. And that makes sense, because if you're a pirate, if you're doing naval combat, archery is a very important skill. And Charge Reflect here is actually kind of underrated, because most likely you're going to try to navigate him among the enemy army to try to get off a really good lined up Hail of Arrow. And the enemy will likely chase after you with cavalry. And Charge Reflect is actually going to protect you a little bit, not in terms of damage negation, but in terms of returning some of the enemy charge back at them to help you beat them off quickly so you can get clear and shoot your Hail of Arrows again. And speaking of Hail of Arrows, that is one of his unique skills, one of his 2 unique skills. The one that he retained from the generic ones is Roar of the Beast, which gives him the minus 18 morale hit, very useful. Hail of Arrows is now down to only 4 uses after a few nerfs, and it still do quite a bit of damage. 10 volleys of 1.5k range damage, once again on large unit size. It will also apply suppression on the enemy hit with them, which reduces their charge speed by a quarter, reduces their attack rate by a third, and also eliminates 500 points of melee charge bonus from them. So if you fire this into enemies charging your front line, you pretty much eliminate any sort of charge bonus and make them really slow, make their attack rate really low, and help your troop destroy them, on top of the insane damage you can do. Now another way to use Hail of Arrow is get really close to an enemy general and then try to burst them with kind of a shotgun spread type of Hail of Arrow, because each wave of arrows, there's 4 waves per attack, is 10 arrows. If you can get all those arrows onto the general, each one's 1.5k, you can kill a general straight up if they're right in front of you. So that is another neat way to use Hail of Arrows. And lastly, Wildfire. That's kind of his charging skill, thematic skill, because most charge skills, passive ones like Final Rush, is only given to yourself. This has a 50-meter effect. So this means all your allies charging with you will gain this bonus as well. 50% speed, 50% additional charge speed. That means you have a right-click target when you're charging, and 25% extra mass, giving you more knockback once you have impact. So it's pretty good to have lead a bunch of cavalries charging to the enemy, and then finding an edge and finding a good Hail of Arrows on top of that, and then demoralize the enemy, see them flee. Very, very useful. So these are great skills for Gan Ning. And moving on, we have Gao Shun. And Gao Shun here is known as the Formation Breaker. And you can see his stat is 25 points instinct, 20 points resolve. It's a 45. It's not all the way at 60, but it's higher than 30. 30 is what you have when you have a generic character with semi-unique background, something unique about the background, but the artwork's not updated. So I feel like it should be higher than 30 for Gan Ning, who we just talked about. And he does have quite a few different bonuses on his title as well. Minus 50% desire for higher office, always good. Unbreakable, that is really good. because of how morale changes have happened. So having any general unit having unbreakable is super strong. Minus 20% retinue upkeep for his own upkeep, and additional 35% upkeep for Camp Crushers and Flying Riders, which are the unique units for Dubu's faction, which is where you will find Gao Shun starting out as. So overall, 55% upkeep discount for Camp Crushers and Flying Rider units under his retinue, but just his own retinue. You notice there's no faction-wide boost here at all. It's all about him and his troops. So that's some limitations, but that's also playing to his strength, and you can kind of use him accordingly due to this. And then moving on, we can see his starting traits. Disciplinarian. This one has some faction-wide effect, also gives himself fatigue resistance. Dutiful gives him another minus 50% desire for higher office, so stacking those, he will actually have no desire for higher office, assuming you don't get any negative ones to offset this minus 100%. He also gets another 10 points of satisfaction, so he's going to be very easy to keep happy with your faction. He was a very loyal man, so this all makes sense. +2 food production for general, if he's administrator commandery. Not super relevant. Very rarely do you make vanguards your administrators, so we can ignore that one. Just some good authority and resolve boosts. And his armor, 70 points of armor base, very high. We mentioned 80 is the max that we have seen in the game so far. 18 points of instinct, which is pretty good stat boost. 5% melee armor piercing damage, 5% melee attack rate, pretty decent. And those are usually combined with his unique skill, Scattering Blows, which is an active buff that gives him 100% melee splash attack range, which just means he now has melee splash attack, because previously it was at 0%. Now it's a plus 100, so it's now at 100%. So each attack carries a splash damage. So this also kind of depends on what weapon you end up giving him. But if you give him a polearm weapon where the animation is a little bit more wide, you can do a lot more. This does require you to perhaps be on foot to maximize this. It's not super strong because it only lasts 30 seconds. It's only for yourself. There's a 60-second cooldown. It's not going to be game-changing. It's just nice that the skill it does replace is Final Rush, which is usually not useful unless you're below half health and you want to kite. You kept Roar of the Beast, you kept Flame of the Phoenix, so those are good things. So overall, pretty standard character, not bad, but nothing too great about him either. Then moving on, we have Gongsun Zan, another faction leader, which is why we see the Iron Fist General also gives a ton of authority, 10 points of expertise, 20 points of instinct, and 30 points of authority. And very similar to Zhuo, we have 25% post-battle loot income, not as high as Zhuo, which is 50%. You have minus 25% recruitment cost for ranged cavalry unit versus the 15% for shock. This also plays into his faction unique unit, which is a ranged cavalry unit. And you also get +3 starting rank. So really focusing on your specialty, your unique unit. The White Horse Raiders or the White Horse Fellows. Very useful bonuses because you'll be fighting a lot as well. And then his traits. We have Brave. Pretty boring trait. Not as boring as Determined, which just has stat boost. You also have Indecisive, which loses his character experience gain a little bit. But protects you from enemy spies a little bit, increase their cover costs for enemy spies, and also decreases your ambition to gain independence as administrator in case you pick him up from another faction. And that's pretty much Gongsun Zan's trait. His armor and his unique weapon adds a little bit of value to him. He has a Dreadbringer, which has a pretty decent attack rate for a polearm weapon and very high armor piercing damage at 1.9k. You do lose a ton of expertise, so that's a little bit a weak point for this weapon, but you gain it back with 24 points of instinct, also causes scare. His armor 65, above average, 15 instinct, 6 authority because he's a faction leader, and 12% speed, which is actually pretty good. And his skills, unfortunately, he does not have any unique skills, so we're going to skip over that page. There is no unique skill for him. He has the same exact skill as the generic Vanguard. And moving on, we have Huang Gai, the Unreadable Warrior. So his background bonus has a different issue than most. So he does have 60 points. When he first got his art, he had 30 points. They changed this after some complaints were filed by maybe me. And you get 20 points of resolve, 30 points of instinct, 10 points of authority. That's great. The problem here is he used to be a champion in the game when the game was first launched, a generic champion with a unique background. He was called Unreadable Warrior then. He was a champion. So his bonus on Unreadable Warrior was 15 charge bonus for Spear Infantry. But now, he's a Vanguard. So his bonus really should change to reflect that. It shouldn't really be a Spear Infantry boost anymore. So that's the complaint I have here about his background. Overall, the points are great. 30 points Instinct, 20 points Resolve. 10 point Authority, not that useful for him because he's really not going to get a leadership position. Not for 15 charge bonus for Spear Infantry, just not that good. And as other traits he has, Brave, pretty standard, Loyal, nothing to really call home about here, and Intimidating, giving him immune to scaring. A lot of stats. You get 12 points, 8 points, 12 points. 12 points the highest you can get from a single trait. So pretty decent here. And then his armor, 45, low end, 18 points of Instinct, 10% melee armor piercing damage. And the most interesting one here is that his armor is the only one I think in the game that gives his retinue scare, which is actually kind of strong because usually the general themselves have scare and it's useful because you're charging them in. But for Vanguard generals, their retinue is usually shock cavalry. And when they go in, they will have a morale shock from being flanked by cavalry, under combat by cavalry. And if you have scare on top of that, you can help route units much easier. So that's a pretty good boost here for his armor. And then his skill, he has one unique skill called Firebomb, a reflection on him lighting the fire in the Battle of Tribute. There's only 3 uses, and it's a missile attack, so you have to kind of aim it. If the enemy stationary will hit, if they're moving, it could miss. And the damage and the effect of this is really hit and miss, because you're throwing out 3 pots of fire bombs, and they land and they splash damage. And the damage itself is quite low, but because it splashes on multiple targets, it could add up to quite a bit of damage. I see it where it lands perfectly on a very densely packed group of spear units, and they just mostly burn to death. I have also seen it miss completely, landing on just land behind some cavalry and just go to waste. You can also use this on target buildings. So if you don't have fire arrows, you want to burn down some towers, you can have Huang Gai go throw this out at the towers and actually burn down the tower. So there is an additional use there. But the one you do give up to gain this is Roar of the Beast. So you don't have any way of reducing enemy morale, which is kind of your go-to calling card, especially since you're giving your own retinue scare. That would be great charging in together, do a roar, cause a scare from your unit, have your unit run down them. That option's kind of gone. But Firebomb's not bad because, aside from the fact that it's a really long cooldown, you only have 3 shots at it, and you can miss with it because it's a missile target attack. If you do hit with it, it's a lot of damage, and the fire will be another 10 points of morale hit. So those are the positives here. And you still have Flame of the Phoenix and Final Rush to get out of trouble if you're below 50% health. And then moving on, we have Li Zhuo, who is the Vicious Strongman, and he has the issue where he still has only 30 points of stat. This should be updated, in my opinion, to closer to 60. He does have some very interesting, very nice background bonus, especially for the late game, because in the early game, the first one really hurts. Minus 10 points of satisfaction for all characters. That's something you probably can't handle until you have the Imperial Court. And that's when you should probably use him as one of your Grand Excellency positions, which also grants the Prime Minister bonuses at that point. And you can take the minus 10 satisfaction and not hurt your satisfaction overall with your faction because you have 7 characters giving you good high authority boost. And the reason why you want to tank that is because you get minus 10% retinue upkeep. And in the late game, you could have anywhere from 5 to maybe even 20 armies. In some of my campaigns, you do have 20 armies. And 10% retinue upkeep is so much money. So that bonus alone is worth it. And you get 5% replenishment on top of that. So his faction-wide boosts are actually really good. So if you pick him up in the early game, you can stash him until you need him in the late game, and you have the Imperial Court, put him in, and you'll see a big influx of cash and also extra replenishment for your units. Very, very strong. And then his traits, brave, reckless, arrogant, not too much to say here. One thing to note is that his armor gave 12% speed and reckless gives 10% speed, and you can get 25% speed from the mobility skill that's on all the Vanguards. So he can actually go really, really fast. And if you look at his armor, which is something we haven't talked about, but he has 15% speed on the armor. That's kind of what I was getting ahead of myself there. So 10% from reckless, 15% from his armor, 25% there, 25% from mobility, 50% speed boost. Give him a really bad horse, the common horse, 90 something speed, plus 50%. You're close to 146, I believe, which is insanely fast. And he's a character without any unique skills. So that means he has final rush. So that actually means if we have all his boosts checked out with his armor, with his skill, which are default, and he has the skill of mobility, which you have to learn, 50% boost, and you get final rush once he hits below half health, that's another 50% boost. You can get about 200 speed, which is just nuts, and no one's going to catch you. If you want to see this in action, I've done it with Ling in one of my campaigns where you're just unstoppable in terms of kiting enemies around, charging in and charging out, because speed and mass equals your kind of charge damage, and you can do quite a bit with that. And speaking of dealing quite a bit of damage, we have Lu Bu, Warrior Without Equal, coming up next, and his background bonus gives a lot of stats. 40 points of expertise, 15 points of resolve, 25 points of instinct. If you add that up, that's 80 points. That's the highest we have seen so far. Now, if you play 8 princes, some of those bonus can add up to 120 points. That's why we're not comparing them. They're not really comparable. They're kind of different games, different settings. But 80 points in the base game and all the chapter pack DLCs, very, very high. Very similar to Dong Zhuo's bonuses, 15% recruitment cost for shock cavalry, additional 15% melee damage. Those are the same bonuses Dong Zhuo have, so those can stack together if both of them are kind of your prime minister, heir, or faction leader. 30% recruitment cost is pretty good, and 30% additional damage. Additionally, 3 extra morale in enemy territory. That one's not so great, but because you might want the first 2, you're going to get the third one anyways, so it's a nice little bonus. And as for his trait, it's all about stats here. Formidable, fear, disloyal. Now, after the recent update to Faction Council, you can actually reroll the disloyal, so it's not so bad to have that, and fear gives you scare and additional morale in enemy territory for your army. So that's a neat bonus, and all these adds quite a bit of instinct to your character as well. And you start out with 3 unique items. Sky Piercer, very good damage, mostly on armor piercing, with 24 melee attack rate. Also loses you a bit of expertise, increase your instinct. If you just look at these, the Gongsun Zan Dreadbringer is actually a better weapon than the Sky Piercer because it does more of the damage in melee armor piercing versus base. I think it's like 400 something base, but 1.9k armor piercing. So it actually does more damage. But this one gives you Unbreakable, which is insanely good because all the morale factors plays a big role. So this is a better weapon definitely overall. You also have armor that's 80 points armor base, plus 6 expertise, plus 15 instinct. Gives you 15% chance to evade capture, extra speed 12%, extra melee attack rate. You also have one of the better horses in the game, 100 top-notch speed for upgraded horse. Usually they slow down, but this one does not. The red hair does not slow down. It also has insane mass, 2.5k, and extra expertise and instinct, and increased chance to evade capture post-battle. So you have 40% right here from armor and horse, and gives you 50 extra charge bonus, which is quite good. So some of the best items in the game. Definitely grab him when you see him. And for his skills, he has 3 unique skills. There is no default or passive skills with him. It's all unique. The Dragon's Gaze, which is an active debuff, telling the enemy to stay put, immobilizes them, decrease their attack rate, decrease their melee evasion. You cannot run away from Lu Bu. Smoldering Fury, it's a phased increase. There's 5 phases. With each time you have in combat, you gain additional damage up to 400% additional, so 5 times damage, minus 15 points of evasion on yourself. So you lose a bit of evasion, but you deal 5 times damage and you cause terror. Pretty insane. And then you have your smash ability. Now this one only deals 1.9k splash damage, and there's a problem in that the cooldown here is 60 seconds. So this skill has been nerfed a few times, and I can probably make arguments not as good as Flame of the Phoenix anymore, but this is all you have, so use it. You're fine. You are still going to be great in dueling. You're going to be great in terms of clearing out enemies, and you have an immobilize ability on top of that, which is quite neat as well. So these are a pretty good combination for Lu Bu here. And then moving on, we have Ling, which we kind of wanted to talk about earlier when we were talking about Li Jue, because they're quite similar. Here we have the Blunt Instrument as his background title. 30 Instinct, 10 Resolve, higher than 30, which I'm very happy about. 40 points is good. You don't have to make them all 60, but don't make them 30. And then 10 points of charge speed, 5 points of charge bonus for shock and melee cavalry for own army. So there's no faction-wide boost here. He doesn't need to go to Prime Minister ever. Basically just boosts himself for the charge speed, boosts some charge bonus for his own retinue or his units in his own army. So slightly better than own retinue, but you have to be running more generals with cavalry to get the benefit, of course. And as his starting trait, he is the character with 4 starting traits. Now this is only the case when you play the 194 start, where he starts in the game under Yuan Shu. If you play the 190 start or the 182 start, he will spawn into the game a bit later, and I think he only gets the first 3 traits here. But if you do start in the 194 start on turn 1, he actually already have 4 traits. He picks up Strong, and it just basically gives him some extra boost. And the thing we have to make note here, which is why I compared him to Li Jue earlier, is he gets Reckless, which is 10% speed, and 15% speed on his armor. Also gives him 70 armor base, very, very high armor base, and 18 instinct. The range block chance is really not that important, especially if you play on higher difficulty where the enemy range units will not shoot at you. But overall, you get that 25% speed boost. You can get the boost from your mobility skills, and like Li Jue, he has no unique skills, so pretty much just going to get Final Rush. And if you are under 50% health, you're going to get that 200 speed, and it's going to be insanely fast. Then moving on, we have the most brilliant warrior, Ma Chao. 10 points of resolve, 20 points of instinct, 30 points of expertise, extra armor for shock cavalry, extra melee damage for shock cavalry, once again playing along the unique units, and then 10% recruitment and upkeep cost for Tiang units. So this could be Tiang cavalry, this could be Tiang infantry. It's okay. It's great when you're playing Ma Teng's faction. It's useless when you get him playing as other factions, because if it was to cavalry units, then it's useful for everyone. But because it's Tiang units, it's only useful when you're playing their faction. And maybe in the future, Han Sui's faction. No idea how they will implement his faction in the future, maybe as a free DLC, and I don't know if he's going to get Tiang units as well. But assuming he does, then it's going to be useful for 2 factions. But for everyone else, quite useless. Now for his starting trait, Brave, Fraternal, Reckless, so he gets increased speed from Reckless again. Obviously there's a lot of other bad things about Reckless, but the speed boost is quite nice. And then he doesn't have any unique items except for his armor, but highest value in the game, 80. Positive stats in expertise and instinct, and also a little bit extra speed boost, not quite 15%, but 12% is also quite high. So he's running at 22% just from his his traits and his armor. And then speaking of his skills, he does have one unique one, which is in the bottom here. Internal Blaze. It replaces Final Rush. And this one's quite different. It's not activated when you are at half health. It's activated whenever you're charging at a target. And once you're charging at a target, you gain 250 melee charge bonus, which is quite high. Double your mass, which creates more knockback, and increases your charge speed by 50%, which is also quite good. But gives you Impetuous, which means you might lose control of him. He might be just chasing down a target and go, kind of crazy on his own, which is okay. It's not bad because the boosts are so, high. 250 melee charge bonus, double mass, 50% speed. It's probably worth it. And you're losing Final Rush, which is useless when you are healthy, very useful in terms of kiting when you're low health, but this is a good replacement in my opinion. You still keep the Roar of the Beast, you still keep Flames of the Phoenix. It's a improved set of skills, definitely. And after talking about Ma Chao, we have to look at his dad, Ma Teng, Protector of the West. 60 points of stats, more authority because he's a faction leader. extra damage recovery, 100% income from Silk and Spice. That one's actually quite nice and makes him quite useful when you pick him up as other factions. Even though he also has the recruitment upkeep cost only for Qiang units, but 20%, so better than Ma Chao. And he has poor background, which means if you're playing as Ma Teng, this is not so great because you're losing 25% income, which amounts to 500 per turn. But if you pick him up as another faction, then this doesn't apply because he's not going to be your faction leader. And speaking of faction leader, he has Cruel, which is not the easiest to deal with. Careless, not a great trait either. And Loyal, which is pretty useless when you're a faction leader. So these traits are not great. And he doesn't start out with any unique item aside from armor. 60 base, 18 instinct, 12 charge bonus. Nothing too crazy here. And his unique skill is actually quite interesting. He replaces Flame of the Phoenix, which is the smash damage ability, with Unyielding Earth, which is a commander generic skill, which gives nearby units extra charge resistance and melee evasion. It's an Unbreakable. Unbreakable is good, but only for 30 seconds. Not a huge fan of this change. You lose a lot of damage potential with him, so he's pretty much just kind of a buffing and debuffing general on the field, and runs around once you're low health with Final Rush. Not too impressed here. And then moving on, we have Sun Ce, the Little Conqueror. 60 points. Also reflects the fact that he could be a faction leader in later starts, and that's 30 points authority right there. And the most insane ability in the game, 100% charge bonus for cavalry. So it doubles your charge bonus for your cavalry units. So anything with like 280 becomes 570, and charge bonus is just so strong in the game. It goes through things like melee evasion for the first 10 seconds. It just erases generals from the game. Very, very insane. You should definitely try to get him as much as you can. Make him your heir, make him your prime minister. Super useful. Also gives you the cost of half cost in terms of establishing order in deserted settlements. So colonizing, half cost. So instead of 4,000, 8,000, it's 2,000, 4,000. And you get 15% melee damage for all shot cavalry. Kind of plays into the first one. And the first one is just so strong because it says for all cavalry. That means shock, melee, range, they all count. Super, super good. And then in terms of his traits, we have Brave, Arrogant, Fiery. Pretty standard here, nothing too crazy. And then his armor, very low armor value, 45, 18 instinct, 12% speed. And he has some unique skills. He had two actually. He has Devastating Roar, which is 2 uses only, replaces Roar of the Beast, which causes 50 morale hits instead of 18. But since you only have 2, there's a little bit of weakness here. Flame of the Phoenix, same, default for everyone. And Blood Fury. That's the replacement for a passive buff. And this one is when you're winning in melee combat or when you're in a duel, you get a boost to your damage, a small boost. But you also go berserk, which is fine when you're in a duel because who else are you going to be fighting? So it's a nice buff to the character, and 25% damage, it's better than 0. So it's not huge. It's not like the 400% you see from the pool, but it's something. And then you have Sun Ce's sister, Sun Ren, the Rising Sun. Also 60 points of stats, mostly in Resolve actually, which is quite interesting. If she's leader, 50% income from family state, extra 1,000 per turn. And otherwise, 3 morale, nothing too fancy here. In terms of her traits, we have Loyal, Fiery, and Kind. Not bad. Kind is pretty useful, 5 points of satisfaction. And then she does start out with a bow on top of her unique armor. See, she has 60 armor, but Sun Ce has 45 for some reason. She gets 40% extra ammo, which is kind of her specialty because she gets a bow, Cinderbar red bow, good damage on the bow, good range. You can fire it or mount it backwards, and you get extra instinct on it because she's a Vanguard. So all of this ties up quite nicely. Then in terms of her skills, she has a very weird skill tree too. She has Heart Seeker. This is 3 use, and it's a missile attack, so you can't miss. You want to hit stationary targets. You want to aim at enemy generals. If the generals are lined up, this is actually a piercing shot. I've done this twice, I believe, where I have hit 2 strategists lined up together with 1 shot and killed both of them with 1 shot. Because strategist on large unit size only has about 10k health, and this does 15k to every target it pierces. So you can technically kill multiple generals with one hit of Heartseeker. You just gotta aim on the field carefully. And on top of that, she gets Nature's Ally, which is a default commander skills. Give nearby units extra speed, extra morale, ignore force penalties, helps you maneuver to find that Heartseeker shot. And then the other one you're keeping is Flame the Phoenix. And of course, Surin's real specialty is being the only Vanguard female general in the game. That's kind of her calling card. And then moving on, we have Xiahou Yuan, Maker of Ways. 60 points, mostly in Cunning, which is actually kind of interesting because Maker of Ways, I guess, is kind of a supply line reference. So Cunning gives military supplies, and he causes attrition to hostile forces as a faction-wide bonus. So it's kind of more thematic. It doesn't make him any stronger. And you have Dutiful, Energetic, resourceful for his traits. Also nothing too fancy here. And his armor, 68 base, weird number, but pretty high. 18 instinct, range block chance, and most importantly, 15% revenue upkeep. It's very nice in the early game. You get cheaper units to help build up your economy, but in the late game, it's kind of useless. And then his unique skill, he has one, which is Blazing Saddles. It's a terrible skill. It's an active buff, and you can use it when you're not on an elephant. There's a cooldown on it, and it has 2 phases. For the first 15 seconds after you use it, you double your melee charge bonus, your own melee charge bonus. Not bad. You get 50% extra charge speed. Not bad. You get Mighty Knockback, which is kind of redundant because there's a skill on your skill tree that gives you Mighty Knockback anyways. But let's ignore that. The problem with this skill is when phase 2 kicks in, which happens the second after the 15-second ends, and immediately you lose 50% fatigue. Or you increase 50% fatigue. You get tired. So now in the game, fatigue causes attack loss, speed loss, morale loss. It's not good. And it's not just say you become winded. It's plus 50%. So if you become winded when you're charging for the first 15 seconds, you just become exhausted afterward. And it's not that easy to recover that fatigue. And you're not even applying this on nearby units, so you're not getting a lot of value. Maybe if you play on records mode, where your retinue or your personal general unit has some units in it, so that your Mighty Knockback, your charge bonus, they might apply more. But when you're just a single general, Blazing Saddle, not great. And the other problem is it didn't replace Final Rush, which has a very similar feel. So overall, sure, if you're below half health, you use Blazing Saddle with Final Rush, you get insane charge speed, insane charge bonus. But then you're really tired and you're really low health. And you don't get any morale debuff ability. So if Blazing Saddle replaced Final Rush and you kept Roar of the Beast, it would be a lot better. But now you have kind of 2 redundant skill, and the one that you got as a special one doesn't feel much better than the passive one, which doesn't punish your fatigue and gives you pretty much the same thing Blazing Saddle offers. So that's kind of the issue here. Then, moving on, we have Liang, who's newly added into the unique artwork here in Face Divided. Still 30 points of skill, could use an update. He only gets 10 charge bonus for Shock Cavalry, also really, really bad. This is just a very weak background. And he has a new trait as well, Frivolous, which is not that good. You lose 4 resolve, gain 4 expertise, so stat neutral, plus 5 satisfaction, minus 5% character experience. Not a huge fan of this. Relentless, intimidating, not bad. And he does start out with a unique weapon, Defense of Levity. Now the stats on this weapon is not the greatest. It has the same exact stat as the Z of the Heavenly Mandate, the golden default Z in the game, except it has 5% extra melee evasion, which is also kind of strange because he's a Vanguard, but the weapon stats are from a resolve stat weapon tree. And it's showing a glaive, but it has the weapon attack rate and damage that's more associated with a Z. So it's all kind of strange going on here. His armor is okay. I would say it's just average. 50 armor, 14 instinct, that's kind of low. 5% speed, 12 points of charge bonus. It's alright. And his unique ability here is Mighty Thrust. So this is a good example of something that's very similar to what Xiahou Yuan was trying to do, right? You increase mass, you increase charge bonus, you increase a little bit of damage, and it activates for 30 seconds and it has a cooldown. Doesn't cause you to get fatigued, replaces final rush. You kept Roar of the Beast, you kept Flame of the Phoenix. So this is kind of a good example of how to play out that skill. And Xiahou Yuan's kind of a failed example. So that's why Xiahou Yuan's not that useful. You're going to see that reflected on our tier list a little bit later. And then moving on, we have Zhang Fei, the Drunken Brawler. 60 points of stats, mostly in Resolve, a little bit Instinct, a little bit Expertise, all combat stat, all good. Minus 50% desire for higher office, 12% melee damage for all shot cavalry. Nothing to mail home about, but the desire is really good for unity gains for dual-based factions, so that's why he has that. In terms of his trait, Fraternal, Intimidating, Fiery, pretty standard. He does have a unique weapon. So here we have one that's mainly base damage. And if you have seen our weapon tier list, you know that the Three Brothers weapons, not the greatest in the game, but they're not bad. A lot of stat boost, not a lot of damage, because most damage on base, which makes them a lot weaker. Armor's okay in terms of armor value, but what's insane about Zhang Fei's armor, after the 55 armor base and 18 instinct, is that you get fatigue immunity, which is just really, really good in the game. And this is the only character here that defaults to fatigue immunity among all the Vanguards, and that's going to kind of elevate him. But overall, not too bad here. Armor, fatigue immunity stand out. And then in terms of his skill, he has two unique ones. He has Blazing Roar, which is his unique roar. He only uses this once per battle. It does 100 point of morale decrease. So if the unit is not unbreakable and you get all the enemies to go around 1 point within your 50-meter effective range, and you roar, you win the battle. They will all rout. They won't recover after the 15 seconds because they will basically all rout, and you win. It can happen. I've done it before. It's hard. You have to kind of, herd all the enemy, corral them into a 50-meter range around Zhang Fei, roar, and get the job done. Most of the time, it becomes worse than the default Roar of the Beast because you can only use this once. Whereas most of the time, Roar of the Beast is effective enough to route the units around you, and you move on to the next group, you route them slowly and slowly. But here you kind of have to do a setup and do it all in. But it opens up potential for you to route the entire enemy army with one roar, which is also kind of a design thematic with history about Changban Po and romance roaring, causing Cao Cao's army to retreat. So that's kind of a design decision. And then we have Sundering Strike. Minus 50% melee evasion, does a little stat damage. Not bad. The problem here is that it feels like a dueling skill, but if you read the requirements, can target if not general. So it's meant to be used on troops and helps your other troops kill them faster by reducing their melee evasion. It has a little bit of cone shape splash damage attack, not a circular one, so that's not super good. And you kept Final Rush. So I would say his skills, not necessarily an improvement from the default ones, but it is quite unique in that no one has this. And Sundering Strike's key point is it has super low cooldown. So you're supposed to run into a group of enemies, use this, and then run out, go to another group and use this again, because 20-second cooldown is super short. And you might not kill a lot of people, but you're supposed to debuff them. And that's kind of Zhang Fei's job. So moving on to our last character here, we have the Reform Brigand here, the Zhou Tai. Super, super insanely OP that he had been nerfed twice. He still has only 30 points of stats. And I think this should be improved. If you're going to keep nerfing him, give him buffs where he needs the buffs, right? The stats should be higher than 30. 10% armor for all shot cavalry. Okay, not too bad, not too good. Loyal, direct, solitary. Solitary is kind of bad actually. Or in the early game, the satisfaction hit to this army, especially if you're playing on legendary difficulty, not the greatest thing. But overall, not a bad list of traits. And then his armor, very high value. 75, 18 instinct, 5% melee attack rate, 12 charge bonus. And then here's where he's strong. He's a bandit character, so he gets targeted strike. That's default, that's regular for all bandit characters. He has Final Rush, that's default for all characters, but he has Undying Vow, which is an active buff. It can be used if all your Oaththorns are alive and you're not on the elephant. So you need to get an Oaththorn first. Once you have an Oaththorn, you use this ability, you lose all your melee evasion, but you become fatigue immune and unbreakable. And you have a passive heal, which is now nerfed to 0.2% of your max health from 750 per 10 seconds. Or was it 75 per 10 seconds? Anyways, it's nerfed down. But the fact that you can keep healing, the fact that you get final rush when you're below 50%, as long as you don't get knocked off your horse, Zhou Tai can solo any army. Give him enough time, right? You charge away when you're low health with 50% speed boost from final rush. No one can catch you. You heal back up just by standing there. You're always fatigue immune, so you can outrun anyone without getting tired. You're always unbreakable, so if you're the last unit, you won't run away. And just charge back in. Kill everyone. It's totally possible. Done it a million times. The other nerf they did is that you can't use Undying Vow now on an elephant, which was the really insane thing, because if you give him an elephant, you cannot get knocked off an elephant. So because you can't get knocked off elephant, you have everything that's given here, except you also have the elephant. And that's just insane. You can just solo armies all day with him without any issues. So that's Zhou Tai here for you. It used to be the point where the first time he was introduced, there was a bug with his heal where he always healed, even if he had 0 health, which means if you have him in a duel and he lost to 0 health, the enemy chopped his head off, he was still healing. So you can see a headless Zhou Tai get right back up, fight the duel, get knocked down, and get back up again, which is why he had insanely high delegate value, because the AI would delegate the battle, and he would just never lose health. Like, he would go to 0, but he wouldn't, die. There's no death, there's no unbreakable, there's no fatigue, and he would just win delegates 1v3000. And they fixed that, but his healing was still too strong. Now they nerfed the healing. I still think he's too strong. But that's going to do it. That's going to do it for the overview of all our Vanguard characters. He's the last one on the list. Now we're going to hop back over to the tier list and rank them all. Alrighty, so after that overview, we're finally ready to put these Vanguard generals into our tier list. Now, because they're all unique generals, they're all technically pretty good characters to have in the game. So it's going to feel pretty bad to put these guys from S to D. Some of them have to go to D, and they're going to appear bad, but just note that they're all better than generic Vanguards, at least most of them, due to stat, due to better armor, due to unique skills. They have something that helps them stand out. And if they don't, I'll make it clear. But the first thing we're going to do is start from the bottom and go up. So someone has to be D tier, and if you paid attention to our overview, you probably can guess who it is. And it's going to be our Maker of Ways, Xiahou Yuan. Now, Xiahou Yuan is here for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that he messes up his own skill tree. His unique ability, Blazing Saddles, replaces a very useful Vanguard ability and duplicates the effect of Final Rush, which really weakens him because he loses the ability to roar and deal 18 morale damage. Instead, he has 2 abilities that gives you extra charge speed. And the unique one he has gives him fatigue. And on top of that, even though he does have 60 skill points on his background, which provides a pretty weak faction-wide bonus in terms of attrition, 30 points of that is given to Cunning, which is pretty useless for a Vanguard general. So overall, the design just doesn't fit very well. He does have a saving grace in that his armor gives 15% retinue upkeep discount, very, very useful in the early game, and also provides decent amount of armor and has good stats on that. So he does have some saving grace there, but compared to everyone else on this list, he is going to fall down to the D rank. And he's the only general who's going to be in the D rank because, as we mentioned, pretty much everyone here is pretty strong and useful. And moving on to the C rank, we're going to kick things off with Ling. Now, Ling's problem here is Blunt Instrument gives 40 points, so it's not bad there. It's more than 30. He doesn't have any unique weapons. He doesn't have any unique skills. His strength comes from the fact that he can become really fast if you give him the right skill, mobility, gives him a bad horse actually, a common horse gives him the most speed, and then you have 10% from reckless, 15% from his armor, and he's just a speed demon once he drops below 50% health. And that's pretty much all he's good for. There is nothing special about him, no special skills, so not too much going on. So compared to everyone else, he's going to drop pretty low. Now, he's still designed pretty well with 4 starting skills. His armor is 70 in terms of armor value, so there's strength here. And he does have a pretty well-rounded kit compared to Xiahou Yuan, as he does have the Roar of the Beast, minus 18 morale, incredibly powerful in the current patch with the morale changes. So he's going to go to the C tier, and joining him, we're going to put Huang Gai. Now, Huang Gai is not weak. I just feel like he could use a little bit of an update because his background still gives that spear bonus, which is a little weird, and his replacement skill or his special skill being the firebomb has some issues. First, there's only 3 uses, and it's not like Hail of Arrows. Hail of Arrow does a lot of damage. Firebomb don't do that much damage. At best, you wipe out half of one unit, right? You can target one retinue unit, it throw the bomb, land perfectly, maybe you blow up half of them. That's not that good. If you line up the Hail of Arrows correctly, you can wipe out tons of unit per Hail of Arrow, and you have 4 uses on that, whereas his is only 3 uses. Sure, you can use it to light some fire, but fire arrow is not the hardest thing to get in the game and pretty essential to get in the game. So it's not like you're replacing a skill that's hard to get. Burning down towns, burning down towers, that's really not the general's job. So it's not something you can, phone home about. So I think he belongs in the C tier. And that's the only generals that I'll put in the C tier, because most of these generals, as I said, are pretty decent. So moving on to the B tier, I think we're going to put Li Jue here in the B tier. The reason is that he's very, very similar to Ling, except he has a very good background bonus. Remember the minus 10 points of satisfaction hit, but minus 10% retinue upkeep and plus 5% replenishment. To be honest, those are really, really good. If we're making a tier list based on best Prime Minister heir faction bonuses, he would be up there. But since we're doing this tier list, at least for this one, more along the lines of comparing all the Vanguard generals, he has generic skills similar to generic Vanguards. Nothing else about him stand out, no unique items except for his armor. But his background bonus is going to carry him into the B tier. That's the separation he has between him and Ling. Aside from that, he's very, very similar. He also has the potential to go really, really fast. Reckless plus 15% from his armor. That part is almost identical. The fact that they don't have a unique skill, super similar. But that background bonus, a great separator here. And joining him is going to be Gao Shun. Now, Gao Shun is kind of weird. I think he can go B or C. He's kind of the opposite. Whereas he's getting carried based on his faction-wide bonuses, Gao Shun's getting carried based on his faction unique unit bonuses, because he can be the general that you have early on in Lu Bu's campaign, who is extremely loyal to you because his background has the minus 50%, and then he also has a trait that gives you minus 50%, means he'll never have desire for higher office. And then on top of that, you gain access to 55% discount for your unique units, thus enabling to use these very expensive and slightly more powerful. I don't think Lu Bu's unique units are super powerful, but they're medium tier, and they're high quality until the mid game. So you can use them early on at a heavy discount. And that's something that is quite valuable. And he himself is not too bad either. I think using him as a general that climbs up the walls to take down units on walls is very, very powerful, because you have a very cramped space. And if you use scattering blows when you're on the wall, you can have that splash damage in full effect, and you can deal a ton of damage with him. So that's kind of his strength here. And then joining this list will be our newest general, Gan Ning. So Yan Liang has a couple issues. His background's not updated, stats a little bit low. His gold weapon that's given to him is not too special, right? 1.1k for both base and armor piercing, not bad, but as we mentioned, it feels more like a champion weapon given to a Vanguard general, which just feels a little off. There's additional 5% melee evasion, which feels like a duelist stat as well. And that's not usually what Vanguards are used for. Like, it fits better if the weapon goes to maybe Wen Chou and let Yanang find something else, which is just a little weird. Aside from that, he doesn't really have too much going for him. He has a new skill, Mighty Thrust. It's a charge ability. It's better than Xiahou Yuan's, but it's not super strong. It's well designed in terms of the non-overlap with Final Rush. So you still have your Roar for morale decrease. You still have your Flame of Phoenix for damage. So I would say he's an improved generic version. You get a free weapon they can maybe use on a different character. So those things are strong. But as a character, maybe after he gets a couple more stat points, maybe a more specialized background bonus, he would move up a little bit. But B tier is not bad. Most of the generals are going to be in B tier. And speaking of most of the generals, we're going to put both Ma Teng and Ma Chao here. So this is maybe a little bit controversial. I know Ma Chao is very popular. He also has 80 armor, very, very strong stats on his armor. But I think the problem with both of them is that when you're playing as Ma Teng, Ma Chao and Ma Teng are super good, maybe even S tier, because combined, you get 30% discount to recruitment and upkeep of Teng unit. But if you're playing any other faction in the game, that background bonus is completely useless. So at that point, they would drop a bit. So there's got to be a middle ground here, and I'm going to take the side of most of the factions in the game, right? Sure, they're great when you're playing the faction that they have. It's designed to be played that way. But for anyone else, if there's so many factions in the game, maybe you're taking Ma Chao in through marriage, faction wipe by Gongdu. Very, very possible. It's very easy to get Ma Chao in most campaigns. At that point, he's not that flashy. Aside from some good base stat, he doesn't start with any unique weapons. His unique skill is a charging one. I'm just not a huge fan of charging skills. It's not that useful. I think it's better when you're playing records mode, for example, when you have cavalry units as part of the general's retinue. But in romance mode, which is what I largely play on, the general is ready and saying, getting 50% more mass on a single unit or faster charge speed on a single unit, not going to make the biggest difference. So I think Ma Chao and Ma Teng are both going to be here. Better stats overall, but less bonus, 10%. Better bonus. There's also the 100% Silk and Spice. That part is quite useful, but you have to get Ma Teng's faction wiped, and not by you, to be able to benefit from that. So that's a little bit tricky. So better bonus, but worse stat, better stat, worse bonus, even out to both B tier here. And joining them is going to be Gan Ning. So Gan Ning used to be probably closer to S tier. That's when Hail of Arrows was unlimited use. You can use it as many times as you want, and you can solo any army in the game. You have charge reflect on your armor, giving you the option to kind of basically tank some of the cavalry charges, return some of that damage, and find yourself better angles for the shot. Now, he's a character with good charge, can pass on that charge wildfire to his retinue units. So that's what I like to see. Basically a whole group of shot cavalry getting a boost in speed, mass, and damage. And on top of that, you have Hail of Arrow, only 4 use now. The reason why he's dropping is not just because Hail of Arrows is nerfed to only 4 shot, but also because Bandit Sentinels all have Poison Volley. So now, it's very, very easy to get characters with this skill. It's no longer rare. And when it's no longer rare, you don't really care about getting Gan Ning. And Poison Volleys is questionably better than Hail of Arrows, because all you need to do is spread the shot over the enemy and poison their unit. It deals less direct damage but more continuous damage than Hail of Arrows, which needs better aiming to actually get all the damage out. So that's questionable. So when a generic Bandit Sentinel have your best skill as a default skill, your value is going to drop a little. And his armor value is really weak at 47, I believe. It's just really low. But I feel like he has the whole setup as a very good charging general with Hail of Arrows. Definitely good, just not S tier or A tier here. And the generals who are going to be S tier and A tier, first off, let's talk about A tier. And we might as well put the first general we talked about up here, Dong Zhuo. So his thing is discounted shock cavalry, a lot of boost to shock cavalry, extra 50% post-battle income. That's actually quite good. 50% family estate income. That's quite good. Super high stats on his character, super high stat on the armor. Has a gold sword at the start, one of the better unique swords in the game with the Sunder armor ability, minus 25% armor, pretty decent damage on it. So that's all great, right? That Dong Zhuo is very strong. He even has some very interesting, unique skills. Reign of Terror, giving your units insane boost of attack, sacrificing some melee evasion, giving them unbreakable. You also have your Blade Breaker. That's a really cool ability in my mind. You get 100% extra armor once you drop below 50% health, making you pretty much invincible against most low-tier troops, where most of their damage is on regular base damage. They will do no damage to you, and you can just slaughter people. You don't have the morale hit, but you have Flame of the Phoenix, so you can smash people. Dong Zhuo's really good at getting down and dirty into fights, and he will do well in them with all his insane stats, weapons, and abilities. So he's going to be A tier here. There's still some weakness in that he's not like a win instantly type of general, and also he's a very hard general to get if you're not playing as Dong Zhuo's faction. It's pretty much near impossible to get him when you're not playing as his faction. I think the only way you can kind of do it is where you play a faction that's close to him, so basically Ma Teng, and you rush him down while you get a capture on him to force him to get fondness on you, which makes him forget about the grudge, and there's a chance he might join you after. It's super complicated. I've never seen it done where Dong Zhuo joins your faction as a general, so we're going to hold him back here in that he's not super available. It's pretty much impossible to get him, and he dies super easily to events. That's another way you won't really see him. Maybe in the 182 start, you might have a way of getting him because you have more time to set things up to wipe out his faction. But aside from that, super good general, just not super available. Then we also have another faction leader. Gongsun Zan is also going to fit here. His bonuses are very similar to Dong Zhuo's, very focused on his unique unit. In this case, we're talking about White Horse Fellows, White Horse Raiders. So we're going to add a little bit of their power spike to the general himself. Obviously, if you're not playing as a faction, the bonus will still work. So unlike Ma Teng and Ma Chao, which is Teng units only available in their faction, Dong Zhuo is shock cavalry, your range cavalry. So even if you get him and he's not, you don't have access to White Horse Fellows, you don't have access to White Horse Raiders, you can still get mounted archers, mounted crossbowmen, Imperial Household Cavalry. Those are range cavalry units, and they're insanely good. So imagine them with 25% recruitment discount with +3 extra rank. That's still a great army setup. And he starts out with a gold weapon. That's insanely good. Out of all the weapons here, aside from Lu Bu's Unbreakable on his weapon, you have the best weapon. You have more damage than Lu Bu's weapon, but Lu Bu has the Unbreakable that's going to give him a small edge there. So he's also going to be A rank here. Sun Yuan, I'm going to put her here. She can drop. You can drop her to B. She's very similar to Gan Ning in that she has a limited range ability that you have to aim. It deals incredible amount of damage when you hit. The reason why I'm going to lift her up is because she's the only girl here. And you might think that's silly, but that's not being, trying to balance out sexism or anything. But because she's female, you can get her through marriage pretty consistently. And that's something you can't say for a lot of these generals. So she's actually super available compared to many of the generals here, which you might not see in campaign. Anytime you start a campaign, you're thinking about, what happens in year, I think 204 now in Harvest or Autumn. You're trying to get that marriage through because you have a chance as Sun Yuan. So because she's pretty decent in terms of character, she has 60 armor. She has more armor than her brother Sun Ce, and she has good stats. She has good abilities. So nothing wrong with her. Her other ability being Natural's Ally, it's actually underrated. I think Natural's Ally is actually pretty good, increasing all units around you by 25% speed, 10 morale, force penalties. It's a passive bonus, so I think it's even better than, say, Final Rush. Does sort of the same thing, a little less effective, but passes on to everyone instead of just yourself. And once again, Heartseeker, when used correctly, can be pretty devastating. So she's going to go here in the A tier. And we're going to also put Zhang Fei here in the A tier. So also, something we forgot to mention, starts with a gold bow, start with a gold weapon, start with a gold weapon, start with a gold weapon. I know he starts with a gold weapon. If they update his stats, I might move him up, but his gold weapon doesn't really fit him. That's the problem that we mentioned. Zhang Fei's gold weapon, not the strongest, lowest damage compared to them, a lot of base damage basically, but he does have fatigue immunity on his armor. So that's gonna really set him apart and make him stronger. His roar, when used correctly, can be incredibly powerful, but also can be ruined by someone who's unbreakable, right? As long as one unit's unbreakable and they're not all routing at the same time, the rest of the units will bounce back. So in that case, Roar of the Beast might be straight up better. So Zhang Fei is going to go here in A. And the final three are going to be our S tier generals. Surprise, surprise. So of the three, I think Sun Ce is the strongest because of his 100% charge bonus. That's it. That's the only thing carrying him, because that impacts your whole faction, and cavalries are so strong in Three Kingdoms already, doubling their charge makes them just insane. So any chance you can get Sun Ce and make him your heir, make him your prime minister, heck, even make him your faction leader, it's worth it. And he's going to help carry your campaign, make things so much easier. And if you're playing as his faction, he happened to have some of the strongest faction mechanics in the game, with his legacy of extra capture chance, his incredible court, shared expertise, just insane. The design of his faction is just totally broken, and the amount of generals he get is also insane. Then between these two, I think it's close. I think Zhou Tai is probably going to still be higher than Lu Bu, just based on the fact that Undying Vow is really, really broken, but it does require setup, because you need to get an Oathworn. That's actually not that easily done, depending on when you get him. Sure, if you get him super early on, you can set him up, you have the Oathworn, you have the ability, you can solo any army, but that playstyle might not be super enjoyable. So I can see an argument where Lu Bu is probably maybe second here. He also starts out with 3 gold items, his unique armor, of course, his weapon, which gives unbreakable, insanely high damage, red hair, top speed, high mass, unique horse, something that's super rare too. He has 3 unique abilities: freeze the enemy in place, decrease their stats at the same time, open them up for insane fire attacks. You know, oil puddles usually does nothing in the game, but if you use Dragon's Gaze while they're on an oil puddle, then you lit it up, they're gonna stand there and they're gonna burn, and it's magnificent. We've done it once when we played our Lu Bu campaign, and super proud of that moment. You also have a really strong smash ability. It's been nerfed twice, I think. Cooldown's been nerfed, damage has been nerfed. It's not as strong as before. It's probably not even as strong as the basic one, but it's what you have, and it's good enough. You do a lot of damage. And because you have Smoldering Fury, you're insane in dueling or sustained fights. 5-time damage, it's pretty much game over, as long as you reduce the enemy's evasion. Doesn't matter how much damage you do, if enemy has evasion, you're gonna die. So you need something to reduce enemy evasion, Wisdom River, or Analyze Weakness, something along that line. With that combo, you will wipe out anyone in a duel. So these are going to be the tier list for the Vanguard generals. Hopefully you guys enjoy this, and we're going to move on with the champions next week. And then we're going to do class by class, and then we're going to do special categories, let's say non-deployable, let's say 8 princes, and then we're also going to do some semi-unique generals, the ones without art but with very interesting backgrounds. We might do a tier list for the best administrators in the game, a tier list for the best prime minister positions in the game for faction-wide bonus. So we're going to do this weekly. Should be pretty fun going forward, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye!